Please don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more English story. The sound of light rain filled the room as David adjusted the microphone. The small community hall was packed, with people of all ages gathered to hear him speak. David wasn't a celebrity or a famous speaker. He was an ordinary man with an extraordinary story. A story of how he weathered the storms in his life and found hope when everything seemed lost. Opening the heart, David began with a smile, his voice calm but firm. We all face storms in life, don't we? Storms that shake us to our core: loss, heartbreak, failure, fear. Maybe some of you are going through one right now. Maybe you've been through one and don't know how to move forward. I've been there too. And today, I want to share with you what I've learned about surviving those storms. The room fell silent as David continued, his tone turning reflective. You see, a few years ago, my life felt like one endless storm. I lost my job. My relationship fell apart. And I felt like I had no direction. I was overwhelmed, angry, and scared. I kept asking myself, why is this happening to me? But the more I resisted, the worse it seemed to get. The eye of the storm. David leaned forward slightly, his eyes scanning the audience. One day, in the middle of that chaos, I met someone who changed everything for me. A wise old man named Mr. Bennett. He lived on the outskirts of town and spent most of his time tending to his garden. I found myself pouring out my frustrations to him one day, expecting advice or sympathy. But instead, he asked me a question I'll never forget. David paused for effect, letting the room hang on his words. He said, David, when a storm comes, what do you do? Confused, David had replied, I wait for it to pass, I guess. And that's when he said something that stayed with me ever since. He told me, the storms in your life aren't meant to destroy you. They're meant to teach you how to stand strong. You can't run from them, David. You have to face them, learn from them, and let them shape you into someone stronger. Facing the storm, David straightened up, his voice growing stronger. That conversation changed everything for me. I realized I had spent so much time running from my problems, blaming others, or wishing things were different. But Mr. Bennett was right. Storms aren't there to break us. They're there to build us. He shared a story of how he applied that advice. I started small. Instead of avoiding the pain of losing my job, I sat down and asked myself, what can I learn from this? I realized I had been stuck in a career I didn't even enjoy. Losing that job was painful, but it pushed me to pursue something I was passionate about, starting my own business. And you know what? That never would have happened if I hadn't faced that storm head-on. Lessons from the rain. David smiled warmly. Here's what I want you to remember. Storms don't last forever. The rain will stop. The sun will shine again. But what you take from that storm is up to you. You can let it drown you, or you can let it water the seeds of your growth. He offered practical advice. His words simple yet profound. 1. Acknowledge the storm. Don't pretend it's not happening. Face it with courage. Admit that it's hard. But also remind yourself that you're capable of handling it. 2. Find the lesson. Every storm has something to teach you. Maybe it's resilience. Maybe it's patience. Maybe it's a reminder to appreciate what you have. Look for the silver lining, no matter how small. 3. Stay grounded. When the wind is howling and everything feels out of control, find something to hold on to: your faith, your family, your values. Those things will keep you steady. 4. Take small steps forward. You don't have to have all the answers right away. Just take one step, then another. Eventually, you'll find your way out of the storm. A personal revelation. David's voice softened as he shared one final story. A few months after that conversation with Mr. Bennett, I visited him again. His garden was blooming, vibrant and full of life. I told him how his advice had helped me, and he just smiled and said, "David, storms nourish the soil. Without them, nothing grows." The audience seemed to take a collective breath, the weight of his words sinking in. A hopeful ending. David finished his speech with a note of hope. I don't know what storms you're facing right now, but I do know this. You're stronger than you think. You have what it takes to weather the rain, the wind, and the chaos. And when the storm passes, and it will, you'll come out stronger, wiser, and ready for whatever comes next. The room erupted into applause, and David stepped back from the microphone, feeling a deep sense of connection with the people before him. He knew that his words might not erase their struggles, but he hoped they'd remind everyone that storms are temporary, and strength is something we build, one challenge at a time. Moral of the story: the storms of life are inevitable, but they are not permanent. Embrace them as opportunities for growth and transformation. And remember that every challenge you face has the potential to shape you into a stronger, more resilient version of yourself. Part 2. The applause had just died down, and a young woman from the audience raised her hand. "David?" she asked, her voice filled with hesitation. "What if the storm feels never-ending? What if every time you stand up, another wave knocks you down?" David nodded, understanding her pain. "That's a great question," he replied. "It's something I struggled with too. Let me tell you about a time when the storms in my life seemed relentless, when I thought I'd never see the sun again." The endless storm. David leaned against the podium, his demeanor casual but his words intentional. "There was a period in my life where nothing seemed to go right. I had just started a new business, one I was passionate about, but it wasn't taking off the way I had hoped. I was drowning in debt, working long hours, and barely scraping by. At the same time, my relationships were falling apart. I felt like a failure. Like no matter what I did, it wasn't enough. He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. I remember one night, sitting in my tiny apartment. It was raining outside, and it felt like the world was mirroring how I felt inside, cold, dark, and chaotic. I wanted to give up. Thought, why bother trying when nothing works? The audience was silent, captivated by his vulnerability. Finding shelter. That night, David continued. I called Mr. Bennett again. I told him how I felt, how tired I was of fighting the storm. And he said something that changed everything for me. He said, David, even in the worst storms, there's always shelter. You just have to find it. David smiled at the memory. I didn't understand what he meant at first, so I asked him, what kind of shelter? He said, shelter isn't always a place. Sometimes, it's people who support you, habits that ground you, or even just moments where you let yourself rest. He turned back to the audience. That was the first time I realized that surviving a storm doesn't mean fighting it constantly. Sometimes, it means finding shelter, leaning on friends, taking a break, or focusing on small things you can control. Taking small steps. David recounted how he applied Mr. Bennett's advice. I started by making a list of things I could do to find my shelter. I reached out to a close friend and told them what I was going through. I started setting aside 10 minutes a day to just breathe and reflect, without thinking about all my problems. I began focusing on one small task at a time instead of trying to fix everything at once. He gave an example. One of my biggest problems was the debt I had accumulated. It felt like this massive storm cloud hanging over me. Instead of panicking, I sat down and made a plan. I cut back on unnecessary expenses, took on a side job, and slowly but steadily chipped away at it. Was it easy? No. But those small steps gave me something to hold on to, a sense of control in the chaos. The light begins to break through. As David shared these stories, his tone shifted from somber to hopeful. The amazing thing is, once I started focusing on small wins, I began to feel stronger. I wasn't out of the storm yet, but I could see glimpses of light breaking through. That's when I realized something powerful. Storms don't last forever. But the actions we take during them, that's what defines us. He looked out at the audience, his gaze steady. The shelter you find, the steps you take, the lessons you learn, they become your foundation for the future. They prepare you for the next storm, and the one after that. Because let's face it, life will always have storms. But the more you face them, the better you get at navigating them.
Praktikal tips for navigating storms.
David then shifted into offering practical advice. His tone conversational but firm. I want to share some tools that helped me. These aren't magic solutions, but they're things you can do right now. no matter how overwhelming your storm feels. 1. Create a safe space. This could be a physical place, a cozy corner in your home, or a mental space, like journaling or meditating. When the storm gets too loud, retreat to your shelter and give yourself time to regroup. 2. Focus on what you can control. Storms make us feel powerless, but there's always something you can control. Maybe it's how you spend your time, who you talk to, or even just your mindset. Start there. 3. Lean on others. Don't try to weather the storm alone. Whether it's a friend, family member, or even a therapist, let someone know what you're going through. Sometimes, just sharing your burden makes it feel lighter. 4. Celebrate small wins. In the middle of a storm, even the smallest victories matter. Did you get out of bed today? That's a win. Did you tackle one task on your to-do list? Another win. These small moments of progress add up. A turning point. David finished part 2 of his speech with a story of hope. There was a moment, about 6 months after I started taking these small steps, when I realized something had changed. I wasn't just surviving the storm, I was growing stronger because of it. My business started to pick up. My relationships became healthier. And most importantly, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't felt in years. He smiled at the audience. That's when I truly understood Mr. Bennett's words. Storms don't last forever, but they can nourish us if we let them. They teach us resilience, patience, and the value of small, steady actions. And when the rain finally stops, you'll find yourself standing taller, ready for whatever comes next. The audience clapped, many of them nodding in agreement. David stepped back for a moment, allowing the crowd to absorb his words, knowing that the real impact of his story would come later, when they faced their own storms and remembered the shelter they could create. Part 3. The applause from the audience faded, and David continued, his voice warm and reflective. Now, let me tell you about what happens after the storm. It's not always instant relief. Sometimes, even when the rain stops, the ground beneath you feels unsteady. That's where I found myself after months of battling through the hardest times in my life. The storm had passed, but I wasn't sure how to rebuild. The aftermath of the storm. David paused, looking around at the attentive faces before him. Have you ever noticed that after a real storm, the world feels different? The air smells fresh, but the ground is muddy. Trees may have fallen, and some things may never look the same. That's what life feels like after a personal storm. You've survived, but now you're standing in a new reality, wondering what's next. He smiled gently, recalling his own experience. For me, the aftermath was filled with a mix of emotions: relief, exhaustion, and uncertainty. My business was finally gaining traction, and my personal life was improving. But I felt disconnected, like I wasn't sure who I was anymore. I realized surviving the storm wasn't the end of the journey. Rebuilding was the next challenge. Rebuilding brick by brick. David leaned forward, his tone steady and encouraging. Rebuilding your life after a storm is like constructing a house. You don't rush into it. You lay one brick at a time, carefully choosing what you want to include. For me, that meant rethinking my priorities and asking myself some tough questions. What do I really want from life? Who do I want to be? What kind of people do I want around me? He laughed lightly, adding, "You know, when I asked myself those questions, I realized how much time I had wasted trying to live up to other people's expectations. I had been building my life for everyone but myself. That's when I decided it was time to start over, focusing on what truly mattered to me." The foundation of gratitude. David shared how he began rebuilding his life with gratitude as his foundation. One of the first things I did was start a gratitude journal. Every morning, I'd write down 3 things I was thankful for, no matter how small. Some days, it was just the fact that I had a roof over my head or that the sun was shining. But those little moments of gratitude shifted my perspective. They reminded me that even after the storm, there was beauty and goodness all around me. He paused, looking directly at a young man in the front row. You might be thinking, gratitude won't fix my problems. And you're right. It won't make your debt disappear or heal a broken heart overnight. But it will give you the strength to keep going. It's like planting seeds in the mud left by the storm. Over time, those seeds grow into something beautiful. Setting new goals. David then spoke about the importance of setting new goals after a storm. Once I started focusing on gratitude, I realized I needed a new direction. I couldn't just sit and wait for my life to magically improve. So, I set small, achievable goals. I wanted to rebuild my business, but this time, I made sure it aligned with my values. I also set personal goals, like spending more time with loved ones and taking care of my health. He laughed, recalling one particular goal. One of my first goals was to wake up 30 minutes earlier each day to meditate and plan my day. First, it was tough. My old habits tried to pull me back into comfort, but I forced myself to stick with it. And you know what? That small habit made a huge difference. It gave me clarity and focus, even when things felt chaotic. Finding new strengths. As David continued, his tone grew more inspiring. Here's the thing about rebuilding after a storm. It reveals strengths you never knew you had. I discovered I was more resilient than I thought. I learned to adapt, to let go of what I couldn't control, and to trust myself. Those lessons became the foundation for everything I've built since then. He shared a story about a pivotal moment in his journey. I remember getting an offer to expand my business in a way that felt risky. My old self would have hesitated, paralyzed by fear. But this time, I reminded myself of everything I had survived. I told myself, if I can weather a storm, I can handle this. And so, I took the leap. That decision turned out to be one of the best I ever made. Helping others through their storms. David's expression softened as he spoke about his desire to help others. As I rebuilt my life, I realized something important. The storms we survive aren't just for us. They're also meant to help others. That's why I became a motivational speaker. I wanted to share my story and remind people that no matter how bad their storm feels, they can survive and thrive. He looked out at the audience, his eyes filled with compassion. If you're in the middle of a storm right now, I want you to know you're not alone. There's a whole world of people who've been where you are and come out stronger. Lean on them. Learn from them. And when your storm passes, don't forget to reach back and help someone else. The power of choice. David wrapped up part 3 with a powerful message. The storms in our lives don't define us. What defines us is how we choose to respond. Will we let the storm break us? Or will we use it to grow? That choice is always ours. He smiled, his voice filled with conviction. You have the power to rebuild your life, one step at a time. You have the strength to find beauty in the aftermath, and the courage to create something even better than what you lost. And when you do, you'll realize that the storm didn't destroy you. It shaped you into someone stronger, wiser, and more resilient. The audience erupted into applause, many wiping away tears or nodding in agreement. David stepped back, letting the moment settle, knowing that his words had planted seeds of hope in their hearts. David took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment. He had shared his journey, the lessons he'd learned, and the transformation that had taken place in his life. The applause continued, but David wasn't focused on the recognition. His heart swelled with gratitude, knowing that his words had touched people's lives. Remember, he said softly, his voice filled with sincerity, the storms you face in life will pass. The clouds will part, and you'll find the strength to rebuild. Don't let fear or doubt hold you back from seeing the light at the end of the tunnel. You are capable. You are resilient. And most importantly, you are not alone. With those final words, David left the stage, knowing that his journey was far from over. He would continue to help others, guide them through their storms, and remind them of the power they held within themselves to create a life of peace, purpose, and success. As the audience slowly filed out, many people approached David, sharing their own stories of struggle and triumph. Some spoke of their own storms, while others expressed gratitude for the encouragement they had received. David smiled, listening intently. He knew that every conversation, every connection, was a reminder of the strength of the human spirit. No matter the storm, people could find their way to the other side stronger, wiser, and more determined to build a brighter future. Morals of the story. 1. Resilience is key. Life storms are inevitable, but your ability to bounce back, learn from the experience, and keep going is what truly defines your success. 2. You are not alone. No matter how difficult things seem, there are always people who care and who are willing to support you through tough times. Seek help when you need it and offer support when you can. 3. Growth comes from adversity. Sometimes, the most painful moments lead to the greatest personal growth. Challenges can teach you valuable lessons that shape you into a stronger, wiser person. 4. Mindset matters. How you perceive a storm can greatly affect your ability to navigate it. Keeping a positive outlook and believing in your ability to overcome obstacles will empower you to keep going. 5. You control your reactions. While you can't control the storms in life, you have full control over how you respond. Your attitude, actions, and choices will determine how you emerge from difficulties. 6. Strength comes from within. True strength is built from within. Even in the most difficult situations, trust that you have the inner resources to face challenges head-on and come out victorious. I'm so glad you spent this time with me. If you liked the story, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe for more. Take care, and see you next time.